Imagine waking up in the dead of the night, hearing gunfire break the silence, stepping outside only to see soldiers, your own soldiers, in civilian clothes walking down the corridor of power. Doors are being smashed. Prominent leaders are dragged away, screaming. Some are shot dead. The house you thought was safe becomes a battlefield. In less than a few hours, lives are lost, the balance of power vanishes, and your nation's future is plunged into chaos. That was January 15, 1966, Nigeria's first military coup. Before I continue, please hit that subscribe button, like, and share this video with your loved ones. Thank you. Now let's dive in. Nigeria before the coup. To understand how and why that night happened, you need to rewind to what Nigeria looked like in the early 1960s. Nigeria gained independence from Britain in 1960, becoming a parliamentary democracy. But the optimism of freedom was shadowed almost immediately by corruption, regional rivalries, ethnic tension, and political instability. Regional governments, northern, western, eastern, held real power. Political parties were often aligned along regional and ethnic lines. Loyalties to tribe and region sometimes trumped national interests. Issues such as uneven distribution of resources, accusations of rigged elections, favoritism, nepotism, and perceived marginalization were daily politics. The western region was especially unstable in the early 60s with what became known as Operation Weedy, violent political thuggery used during election battles. That set a tone, democracy was fragile, and political violence was no longer unimaginable. So by 1966, the country looked peaceful on the surface, but underneath, many people believed the system was rotten, politicians benefiting, regions jockeying for power, the ordinary citizen seeing little. Some officers in the military believed they could fix the country by force. Who led the coup, the plotters and their motivations? The coup was not a spontaneous riot. It had planning, ambition, and ideology, however flawed. The main face behind it was Major Chukwuma Kaduna Nzeogwu. Key points about them. These were many young army officers, mostly majors and captains. Some were university educated. They believed the civilian government had failed. They framed their mission as a cleansing of corruption, nepotism, tribalism, and misrule. For example, Nzeogwu later said the coup was necessary to rid Nigeria of filth and corruption. The operation even had a code name in the north-led region, Operation Damisa. Damisa means leopard in Hausa. Despite narratives calling the January 15 coup an Igbo coup, because many plotters were Igbo, some evidence suggests that northern officers took part, or at least that the coup plotters claimed broad participation. But even if northern officers were involved, the perception, especially after the killings, among many Nigerians was that the coup was dominated by Igbo officers, and that it targeted northern and western political leaders disproportionately. That perception damaged trust. They did not seem to have a long-term coherent plan for governance beyond removing what they saw as corrupt political leadership. They underestimated how fragile Nigeria's cohesion really was. The night of the coup, what happened on January 15, 1966? Here is how the coup played out, hour by hour as best as history records. Before midnight. The plotters had been planning Operation Damisa. In northern Nigeria, Nzeogwu had organized military exercises as cover. Early hours of January 15. Soldiers moved simultaneously in key cities, Kaduna in the northern region, Lagos the federal capital, and Ibadan in the western region. Targeted assassinations. Several senior political leaders were killed. The Prime Minister, Abubakar Tafawa Balewa, died. The Premier of the Northern Region, Sir Ahmadu Bello, was killed in his residence. The Western Region's Premier, Samuel Ladoke Akintola, was murdered. Finance Minister Festus Okotie-Eboh also died. Radio announcement in the north. Major Nzeogwu took over Radio Kaduna and declared martial law over the northern provinces. He announced that the constitution was suspended and that regional governments had been dissolved. Confusion in Lagos. Part of the coup plan in Lagos was supposed to issue announcements via radio. But that announcement did not take place early as expected, it failed in some sectors. Power vacuum and intervention. With top politicians dead or detained, parts of the government were paralyzed. Acting President Nwafor Oraizu made a broadcast saying the civilian government had surrendered power to the armed forces. Seizure of power. Major General Johnson Aguiyi-Ironsi, as the highest-ranking military officer then alive and loyal, accepted the handover and became head of state. On January 17, he formed the Supreme Military Council and suspended the constitution. The coup was violent and sudden. Families discovered bodies. Political life halted. Emergency measures replaced the democratic system overnight. The sense of betrayal was intense. Many Nigerians woke up to news of massacres, shock, grief, and confusion. Immediate aftermath and fallout. No coup happens in a vacuum. The first military takeover of Nigeria in 1966 rippled shockwaves through the country, politically, socially, and emotionally. Loss and grief. People mourned, heads of government, their families, staff. The loss of leadership left voids. The shock to ordinary citizens cannot be overstated. One day you have your civilian governor, your premier, your political officials. A few hours later many are dead, many offices closed, the constitution suspended. Perceptions of ethnic bias. Because many of the killed or targeted were from the north or west, and because several of the plotters were ethnically Igbo, or viewed to represent eastern Nigeria, the coup came to be seen by many northerners as an Igbo-led plot. That perception fueled anger, suspicion, and fear among ethnic groups, especially in the north and west. What may have been intended by some plotters as national reform came to be seen as sectional attack. Power shift. Johnson Aguiyi-Ironsi, himself an Igbo officer, now helmed the country. Some saw that as further proof that the coup had ethnic shading. Ironsi's regime then tried to unify Nigeria politically, but his actions sometimes made it worse. For instance, he abolished regional premiers and regionalization in some functions. That generated backlash. Seeds of counter-coup. The January coup deepened mistrust. It did not resolve structural issues, in many ways, it exposed them. Responding to grievances and perceived injustice, northern officers began planning a counter-coup. Within months, resentment grew. By July 1966, a counter-coup happened. After that, the country spiraled further along ethnic lines, eventually leading toward the outbreak of the Nigerian Civil War, Biafran War. The January coup did not cause the war by itself, but it lit some of the fuse. Long-term significance, why it still matters. When you trace Nigeria's later disasters, civil war, recurring coups, and ethnic conflict, you see threads that link back to January 15, 1966. Here's why this coup remains vital to understand today. Trust shattered. The idea that democracy could solve Nigeria's problems took a huge blow. If elected government can be overthrown in cold blood, by insiders, then credibility is lost. Ethnic divisions hardened. Before 1966, ethnicity and region mattered, but many elites still believed they could work inside the system. After the coup, suspicion hardened. Northerners believed Igbo officers betrayed them, Easterners believed they were being targeted before war. The military as arbiter of change. The coup opened the door for the military to see itself not just as defender of external security, but as interveners in politics. It shifted Nigeria's trajectory from civilian government toward repeated military rule. Cycle of instability. The failure to address root causes, inequality, corruption, fear, meant the coup solved nothing. Instead, it created new problems. Political violence would repeat. The counter-coup. The Civil War. More coups in later decades. Memory and narrative. Every time Nigerians argue about federalism, secularism, distribution of oil revenues, political fairness, you hear January 15, 1966 referenced. It's part of the backbone of modern Nigerian political trauma. What could have been / what if? When you dig into the archives and personal testimonies, you're forced to ask counterfactuals. What if the coup plotters had won cleanly and installed a credible transitional leadership rather than letting Major Aguiyi-Ironsi take over? What if Ironsi had punished the coup plotters quickly and fairly? Might the counter-coup have been prevented, or at least scaled down? What if the civilian government had been stronger, less corrupt, more inclusive? Could Nigeria have avoided the military stepping in? What if ethnic fears had been addressed proactively instead of being exacerbated by killings? These questions don't have easy answers. But they show that many of Nigeria's later troubles were not just accidents, they were born in the choices and failures of that fateful night.